We're about to witness the greatest miracle of the machine age.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will.
Hello, I'm Andy Mort, and this is the Gentle Rebel Podcast, where we explore the intersection of high sensitivity, creativity, and the impact of the trends and happenings in the cultures around us. This is the final episode of 2024, and I want to talk about being an armchair creative and how we might move from theorizing our creative urges to bringing them to life in 2025 without scaring ourselves off. There's a question we might hear people ask as a way to try unlocking and unblocking hopes and dreams, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm not a big fan of this question. I don't really like it that much because, well, me personally, my answer is always nothing. It reminded me of the Twilight Zone episode, A Nice Place to Visit, where there's a guy, a small-time criminal, Henry Rocky Valentine, who dies during a robbery and things go wrong. And he awakens in the afterlife where all his desires are fulfilled. He gambles and wins constantly. He's very wealthy. He can have anything that he wants, basically. And he assumes, as you may well do, that he is in heaven. However, after a while, he starts to grow bored and he starts to get a bit restless because everything comes that he wants without any friction. It comes really easily. There's no challenge. There's no consequences. And then when he speaks to his kind of mysterious guide, who's called Pip, Pip then reveals the truth that he isn't in heaven. He is in hell. And doomed to an eternity of getting everything that he could possibly desire. And I love how this, sort of twists that sort of sense that we might have that, you know, hell or heaven would be the place where all your dreams come true and everything that you could possibly desire happens and all the friction that we have to put up with on earth is gone. And actually, what we see is that's the definition of hell in this story. It presents hell as somewhere that you cannot fail. Success comes with everything. And it doesn't take Rocky long to realize that it is the presence of failure that makes life worth living, really. And I know the purpose of the question, you know, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail, isn't really about living a life of perpetual success. It's not about sort of imagining that is possible. Its intention is to get us stepping beyond the yes buts and the excuses for why we can't try things that matter to us, the things that we say are important. But in my experience, the pull of the perceived reality and the threat of failure is often too strong, actually, for this question to remain useful for very long. If the threat of failure is overwhelming someone, I tend to put a little spin on that question and ask instead, you know, what would you do if you knew you could fail? In other words, what would you love to do if it felt safe to fail, to mess up, to get things wrong, to do it less than perfectly? We sometimes get creatively stuck when we're searching for the perfect path forwards. But like a world without losing is a world of boredom, and an eternity of winning is the definition of hell in this Twilight Zone episode, a life of certainty is a life without creativity. You know, there's no need, there's no room, there's no space for creativity when everything is certain. And so in this episode, I want to consider this fantasy of certainty as something that keeps us in the armchair and away from the arena, and how we might gently let ourselves just step into some of that messy chaos and the beautiful uncertainty of our creative potential, maybe in the coming days, in the coming weeks, the months, and the year ahead. So what are we talking about when we talk about an armchair creative? It comes from this idea of an armchair expert. I'm an armchair expert about a few fields. Classic examples are in sports, when you know all the right things to do, but don't really participate in the doing. A person who knows a lot about a subject, but has little or no experience or real life understanding of that particular subject. We've simply learned all about the field, but wouldn't have much success if we were sort of dropped in the middle of it, because we lack the knowledge of the unseen and the unfelt aspects, the things you can't tell are important until you're dropped in the middle of it, until you're actually doing it. And this point is important because knowledge might be absolutely phenomenal. You might have a huge amount of knowledge about an area or a topic or whatever as an armchair expert. I think that it can be misconstrued as you don't know what you're talking about. But actually, armchair experts often know a huge amount about things. We've got an authentic cognitive understanding of the topic or the area that they're talking about. But we are missing an important piece of the puzzle. And that piece of the puzzle usually comes with a big slice of humble pie, as you learn through experience that life isn't as simple as it seems on paper. So on the one hand, armchair experts can become annoying and insufferable when they sort of direct and correct and advise people who are doing something that they themselves have never done, but they've read about, and they're like, oh yeah, you should do it like this. If I was you, I'd do it like that. And on the other hand, it can give us a sense of protection behind a barrier. For example, the hindsight bias, which allows us to say, like, essentially the best decision was the one that you didn't make. And this is something you often hear in the sport world again, when people are analysing what went wrong in a match or a game or whatever. And they say, that decision, that made all the difference when he made that decision. And in hindsight, you've got 20/20 vision. All of the decisions that shouldn't have been made and all the decisions that should have been made. And also you don't know the impact of all the decisions that you didn't make. So it's easy to sort of put a utopian spin on, if they'd done that, then it would have been a completely different outcome. And these are impossible things to truly predict as well. I wouldn't have done it like that if I was you. Thanks a lot for that helpful insight. And so, I guess I want to spend this episode mindful of the combination of armchair expertise and I guess like procrastination maybe, and to think about why it's worth getting out of the armchair and into the arena if we want to truly understand our relationship with our innate creativity. In creativity, this might show up as people who have done all the courses, they've read the books, they love the idea of creativity and being creative, but something stops them from playing, from exploring, from sharing their creative spirit with the world in some way. And this has been a driving question for me over the years. I love helping people, go from that desire to engage their creativity to the practical, messy reality of making stuff, whatever that looks like for them. And to do it in a way that doesn't feel intimidating or scary, and actually feels very natural and normal. And so to sort of wade through a lot of the stories that can build up, especially around someone when they're just stuck in the armchair, reading all the books, looking at the courses, comparing themselves to other people or seeing what other people are doing and thinking, that's where I need to get to first. Earlier this year, I spoke to the songwriter Aaron Espy. He had written in a book on songwriting, the best way to have more happy accidents is to do more things. Simply thinking about doing things doesn't produce happy accidents. You've got to take action. So essentially, sort of reinforcing this idea that in order to experience what it is to write a song, which includes often many happy accidents, it's the same with many art forms, then you've actually got to do it. You can't just think your way to happy accidents. And this brought the image of the armchair expert to mind, and how much we miss when we get stuck on figuring out how to do something before we allow ourselves to do it. And how with songwriting in particular, this is a completely backwards way of approaching it, in the way that you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You'll never learn to write a song without actually doing it. You know, you might be able to talk about the elements that typical songs in particular genres tend to have. You might be able to kind of describe a song structure and what are the features of a good chorus hook and things like that. You know, you might be able to talk about the science behind why we connect to music as human beings. But unless you actually start doing it, you're never going to know how to write a song. You don't know how to write a song until you've actually written a song. And when you do start, you're going to absolutely suck at it. Because creativity isn't about knowledge. It's not about head knowledge. It's about feel and practice and understanding through the senses and sort of, finding our way through the process. And with Happy Accidents, it's about knowing how to proceed when things suck. It's about knowing what to do when it feels like you're getting nowhere, and when the idea in your head doesn't sound anything like the one that's come out when you've sort of turned it into a tangible sound. It's messy. It can be dispiriting, and it can be hugely frustrating. But like with golf, there's usually a shot or two on a round of golf, even when it is hugely frustrating and there's balls flying all over the place. Usually a couple of shots that bring you back. It's a feeling that it's really hard to articulate, but you want that experience again. It's worth it, just for those little tiny happy accidents. Talking about my own golf game. But yeah, I work with people who can sometimes get stuck in the sort of ideation phase, where they, kind of want to conceptualize perfection before they start creating. They want to conceptualize exactly what something's going to look like or sound like and be like before they then start working on it. And to nail the idea and have a sense of exactly what they want it to look and sound and feel like before they've started doing anything towards it. But that's just not how the creative process works. The idea develops with you and through you, and you just need enough to get started, often less than you think. And often over planning, over preparing can be the absolute creativity killer, because it sets expectations in a way that kind of puts the blinkers on and blinds you to the happy accidents that are waiting to be explored, or the opportunities that are, if you sort of open up to, okay, that's happened here, that got in here, let's use that, let's integrate that into this wider thing. And you miss that when you've got a really, really rigid sense of where you want to go in terms of the finished thing. Action doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be visible to others if you're not ready for that as well. But it does take courage. This idea of the armchair expert kind of reminds me of Brené Brown and her words about true courage. The stepping into the arena, the courage it takes to step into the arena. And essentially that true courage belongs to those who step into the arena, embrace the effort, the failure, the triumph in pursuit of things that are meaningful to them, rather than to those who dismissively criticize from the sidelines in bad faith and in avoidance of doing anything meaningful themselves. So I suppose it's about getting comfortable with letting creativity flow before we feel ready. We might just get into like a practice with that. Set a timer for 5 minutes, write a poem about something that catches your eye in the room that you're in or the world around you. When that time is over, stop. That's it. That's done. And do what you want with that poem. You might take a photo of it, file it in a notebook, or throw it in the bin. Like it's about just sort of loosening that creative muscle or building that creative muscle over time. You might want to share it. If you're feeling that courage, share it on social media, maybe with an appropriate hashtag about what it is that you're doing. And or share it with a friend and just forget about it. And something that you start to notice is the more you share, the less importance you put on the reactions to what you share. It might be that first one you feel like, oh, no one's liking it. And actually the response to that is, okay, I'm going to share again. And if you share and then share and then share, you actually become less bothered about what people, how people are reacting, because that becomes, or it becomes clear that isn't the point to you and for you. So you can sort of really anchor into what this is enabling you to do, rather than other people's reactions to it. And the reasons for sharing it is not other people's reactions. It's to get comfortable with that feeling of sharing. And with that as well, you become more free to follow your creative instincts and to develop your voice as it expresses your sound. And so repeating these kind of micro creative habits as often as possible is really great for starting to notice patterns and see what ideas might be repeating themselves. The happy accidents are going to come in that sort of way. And it's also a great way to fill the creativity pool with small ideas that might find a bigger project in the future. It might be that perfect little nugget that you need, like later on, you're like, something's not working in this project. Oh, wait a second. What have I got in my archive of silly little nuggets? And it's like, oh yeah, perfect. Let's bring that in. It's happened many times for me with songwriting. I've had a quote from Mark Manson sitting in my folder of things to do something with since January this year, 2024. And the quote was, I've found that people get hooked on endlessly intellectualizing their emotional patterns as a way to avoid doing anything about them. The problem is that intellectual understanding can give a sense of progress and change without progress or change actually occurring. I think this is a really interesting thing to think about and to relate to creativity. There's a line in This Is Spinal Tap when the band are standing around Elvis Presley's grave and just trying to work out how to pay respect in a respectful way. And Nigel says to David, it really puts perspective on things, though, doesn't it? And David says, too much. There's too much perspective. I often think about this line. I love that line. And it comes to mind with this idea of intellectualizing and the way that we have grown our sort of therapy language and perspective on psychological concepts and stuff that is going on in us and in our relationships, and sort of raising awareness about why other people might be doing what they're doing and all of this sort of stuff. The personal development world has definitely kind of contributed to this in huge ways, made us all sort of pseudo therapists, with our labeling, our pathologizing of ourselves and others, that really put a perspective on things when it comes to the patterns and behaviors that we engage in and get stuck with. And, while this definitely can have a really helpful impact, it can be insightful, it can help us sort of get unstuck on certain things. When we get caught in the intellectualization loop, we can actually make the problem worse, because not only do we see the issue that we want to resolve and we have a label for it, we can see through all the potential ways that we might resolve it. It can take a huge amount of work to actually come out of our heads and back into the playroom of our creative spirit, because, you might think, okay, I've got this problem, I need someone to help me overcome it. You do all the reading, you do all the courses, you have this really deep cognitive, intellectual understanding of this concept. Overthinking and intellectualization is or can be a defense mechanism, a protective shield that sort of keeps out the threat of vulnerability. And that might be fear of failure or fear of judgment, fear of our own inner critic. And it can appear confident and competent. It can appear like, you know, we can say like, oh, I know all of this. I've tried all of these things and nothing has helped. So all of these things I know you're going to tell me, like, this is what people with this issue do. And I know it all, but it doesn't work on me. And so like the armchair critic, we might be sort of engaging at the theoretical level, at the head level, at the cognitive level. And when we hold onto our thoughts and intellectualize life through a cognitive lens exclusively, you know, seeking meaning, seeking explanations, calculated reasons for everything from everything, the objects of our thinking grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And those thoughts can consume our creative action because they make it too big to start. They make everything feel bigger than they need to be. So I've found that people get hooked on endlessly intellectualizing their creative urges as a way to avoid doing anything about them. The problem is that intellectual understanding can give us a sense of progress and change without progress or change actually occurring. You know, you can't think your way to creativity, and you can't think your way through a creative block. I was recently working with a client around something that they'd noticed in themselves related to a kind of blockage to creative action. And essentially it boiled down to a fear of being misunderstood, which isn't an irrational fear by any stretch of the imagination. You know, there are very real risks associated with something coming across in the wrong way, or someone interpreting something that we've said in a way that actually, you know, might be construed as offensive. But this fear had developed a real stranglehold on certain things for this person. And so they were unable to really let the project that they were involved in and driving develop freely in the directions that they wanted it to go in. You know, it was getting clunky and actually unwieldy with attempts to fill the gaps around the edges of it. Anything that could potentially be ambiguous in terms of how do you interpret this? How do you, what's the reading of this bit? They would provide the explainers. They would do everything they could to avoid misinterpretation from anyone looking on. And so, yeah, my client was like, yeah, this is unworkable. It's ruining the thing. Everything is, the project's lost its spark. It's lost its life. It's lost its sense of purpose. And here we were kind of exploring the way, you know, is this any longer art in any meaningful sense to you? Because it doesn't require anything from the person looking on. You're sort of so focused on how the audience not only responds to it, but understands it and interprets it, that you remove all the mystery and the ambiguity from it. So does that leave any space for the creative spirit to flow between creator and viewer, or creator and audience? So we're kind of then working on, you know, this idea of developing the courage to be misunderstood, because that was where we identified, this courage to be misunderstood is a huge part of this, of letting the project breathe by not getting in the way of it, not letting that fear sabotage it, essentially. So we were kind of coming up with some experiments that they could try to keep quiet under the inner pressure to explain, to justify, to tell someone how to understand the intentions for certain things that they are doing. And so that was quite fun, coming up with ways that you could, experiment with that in everyday life in different scenarios. But I don't think that was a one-off. I don't think that, you know, I said to them, it's not unusual in any way whatsoever. And I think it's an increasingly prevalent thing that we see. You know, many of it, I'm including myself here when I say, you know, people are under pressure to explain. And yet this can be an affront to human creativity, because it suffocates creativity of its mystery and joy. I do another podcast with a friend of mine, Steve, about the TV show Inside Number 9. And there's this particular moment in the episode that we were looking at in the most recent episode of our podcast that neither me nor Steve particularly enjoy, where it essentially one of the characters explains everything. And sort of everything that is sort of twisting your mind in this episode, where you're like, oh, what's going on here? Nothing's adding up here. In a great typical, psychological thriller twist type thing. But then it's explained by one of the characters in such a way that it removes you from the joy of that mystery, and the joy of potentially working it all out. And it just spoon feeds you everything that there is to know. And there's something that feels like a balloon being burst about that moment, and like a gift it's been given and then it's being snatched away. The gift of piecing together the mystery, of making sense of things without being spoon-fed that answer. We were kind of reading around this decision as behind-the-scenes book that we've been using as well, where with kind of interviews with various people who were involved in making the show. And it turns out one of the executive producers had suggested that they do this exposition or this explanation for the sake of the hard of thinking, who would be left confused and annoyed that they didn't understand it afterwards. And so they went with this. And while it may be true that, those people would be left angry and would be left confused, there's also a cost to making decisions to appease those who don't want to think. It brings the rest of us down with them and actually sacrifices the potential quality of the thing that we're creating. If we're thinking about those people who are not going to bother thinking, unless they are the very people who you want to appeal to, you're actually going to compromise the quality of what it is that you do, and you're going to make it less than it can be. We know that attention spans are getting shorter in certain contexts. I don't know whether it's sort of universally true, but with certain things, certainly like YouTube videos, a great example, the trend towards, taking all the space out between the lines, a pause that goes on for too long, it gives people an opportunity to click away. Like, oh, I'm bored. That pause has gone on too long. I'm leaving. Sort of like bouncing around, editing styles, just cutting in and out and doing everything that you possibly can to retain attention before the viewer gets bored, or to keep distracting the viewer so that they don't think about clicking off for the next second or so. And this also extends to the things people want videos about. It's such a bizarre. I think I've talked before about the absurd question that I came across when I was watching Better Call Saul, and I was Googling something about the cast, and it came up with a suggested question, which is Howard good or bad? And I clicked, I was like, that's an intriguing one. And there's loads and loads of people trying to find out whether Howard, who's one of the characters in Better Call Saul, is a goodie or a baddie. And it was like, you tell me. Like, you've watched it. If you're asking that question, you've watched it. You know who he is, and you know all about him. And it was like, oh man, that's quite. We offset thinking to other people. We use other people as proxies for our thinking. We don't opinionate until we've been told, what am I supposed to think about this guy? What am I supposed to like this character? It's like, well, do you like this character? Yeah, but I don't know if I don't. Is he bad? Is he good? What does that say about me? What sort of person does that make me? And it's like, how do you feel about him? How do you feel when you listen to this song? What are the thoughts that arise as you think about this idea, or as you view this image, or whatever it is? Not what am I supposed to feel? What do I feel? And I was struck by a song lyric recently by Stephen Wilson Jr. In a song on his album Son of Dad. And the lyric is, "Grief is only love that's got no place to go." And that really hit me in the gut. It kind of landed in a way that, 5,000, 10,000 words trying to explain a feeling never could. And it didn't need explaining. I didn't need to identify with whatever story gave rise to the song. It's just a lyric that, poof, resonated and has a healing power that transcends thought and transcends the intellectualization that might be tempting to invoke when it comes to engaging with music or art or whatever it is. And that is the importance of art to me. It heals. When we have the courage to be misunderstood as we express the sound in us, we bring healing to some of those who might connect with it. Not because we intend to or because we've created something designed to help healing happen, but because we're creative human beings who speak a range of languages that transcend the mind. And so when I, say, "You're an artist, the world needs your art, now go and make somebody's day" at the end of this podcast, this is kind of it. It requires no action, just you to be you. As twee as that might sound, to not force it, to not try really hard, to just allow the creative spirit to flow and to find its way to the right places where it needs to go. And it will do that. If we get out of the way, if we trust that process, it will happen. And so, this is really the key difference between the Armchair Creative and those in the dirt doing it. The Armchair Creative is stuck in the head and you don't feel it there. I'm sure they could explain to me, why I was moved so deeply by that song lyric, at the sort of biological or physiological or psychological level. But that doesn't add any value to my experience of it. I don't care what's going on. I just want to experience it. It bypasses that experience when we get stuck in, that's actually because this is what's going on and this chemical reaction in the brain is happening and these neurons are firing together. So I don't care. Like, that is just not a great place to experience what it means to be a creative human being when we're stuck there. It's obviously interesting in its own way, and there's a time and a place for the fascination and joy of that, but it doesn't help us engage with the music. So I think this has kind of gone in a direction I wasn't quite expecting, but that's the nature of these things. Do you fancy getting into the weeds with your creative spirit as we move into the new year? Does this feel like something that, do you know what? I need to go from the theorizing to the practice. This is a great chance to start exploring, isn't it? As we move into 2025, if you fancy a chat about it, I'm always open for a pick the lock call. It's just a great way to, maybe start thinking about what it is that you want to shift. Where are the things a little bit stuck or stagnant for you at the moment? And we can, brainstorm some ideas and turn them into practical actions that you might want to take. I'll pop a link in the description for you if you want to book one of those or just find out more about them. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there and wish you a very happy and healthy end of the year. And I will be back again in 2025 with another episode of the Gentle Rebel podcast. Until then, do remember that you are an artist. The world needs your art. Now go and make somebody's day. Bye-bye.
So shines a good deed in a weary world.